chapter 1. Ruth, chapter 1. Okay. Lots of good things to rejoice in today. 2022. We will remember that too. Okay, so some introductory stuff last week, and we started the first few verses. This section that we are going to look at, we are very familiar with, and it really is worthy of being center stage. I heard it. I went to Ivy Wallen's wedding on Saturday. So y'all need to congratulate her when you see her, because she sits, it's hard to tell those yellow Wallens apart. But Ella is the one that has the baby and the husband and is expecting another one. Ivy is the one that just got married, but they both favor each other. But you'll probably see her, not this Sunday because they're on their honeymoon, but in short order. We went to the wedding, and the preacher there used this particular passage because it's just a beautiful description. It has little to do actually with two people being married, but it is such of that spirit that it's hard for people to resist it. I've used it myself in times because it's just an appropriate kind of description of a relationship that has the fingerprint of commitment. Okay, and obviously there's something that's going on in Naomi that is helping Ruth to be able to see her kind of life. We know that she has been around because the boys take some wives. So she's around her, but it's not like, this unending period of time. But there is nevertheless some opportunity for Ruth to hear and figure out the kind of person that Naomi is. So they go to Moab. Elimelech leads them. We talked about that last week. The husband and the sons both die in the land of Moab. They had married, the boys had married Moabite women. And there they are in verse 4. But both of the boys die. So verse 6. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them. Draw a line back up to verse 1. Circle that expression there. Have the Lord had come to the aid, or whatever your translation says there, and draw that back to the famine. I mean, that is the promise that God makes. He has said that he would discipline them with these measures, but then it was also stated very clearly, especially in the books of the law, the books of Moses, that God would do that. And when Solomon is going to set up the temple, remember that he is going to have all this beautiful prayer. And one of the things that God had mentioned, or that Solomon mentions, is if you bring famine. And the reason he mentions that is because there is this usage of it historically. Well, now God comes to the aid. He comes to the rescue. And that is a great spot. He has given them bread. He had visited his people. And it's just a beautiful description. The Lord had come to the rescue by providing food for them. So she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. Now, it's clear that they want to set out here with her, but it's also clear that Naomi already has in her mind what she is going to say to them whenever this separation is going to happen, or what she thinks that she has in mind. So with her two daughters-in-law, she left the place, obviously where they had been living, and she set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. So that's her course. She doesn't have another place. I mean, where else would you go? If something like that happened to you, it's more than likely, it just feels natural for you to just try and get home, you know? And this is what Naomi is doing. Well, you can see 8 down through about verse 13 or so, she has in mind a conversation that she's already going to have with these ladies. Well, Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go back, each of you to your mother's home. Now look at the expression of grace from this woman. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead husband and me. May the Lord grant that each of you would find rest in the home of another husband. It's sentimental. I mean, she had envisioned that those girls would be a part of her family for a long time. But now that she realizes this has happened, there is an expectation. And she understands that because the children did not come in either one of these situations through the marriage, it's going to be hard for them. And there's no husband in the future as long as they stay with her. That's what she's thinking, okay? And you can understand how she would think that way. If you were running through that circumstance and that happened to you, you might sort of set up this conversation in your own mind, just, you know, thinking out loud as to how this would be possible. She wants the Lord to show you, both of them, she's talking to them, I want the Lord to show you kindness. And so she calls on the name of the Lord and she encourages them in the name of the Lord. And it shows her faith. It is visible. She wants God to be involved in this. And it is as each, the Lord is going to include that in verse 9, the Lord grant that each of you find a home and a husband. That's what, so what she's saying is I want God to be involved, to be able to provide for you a home and a place and future and a family and something that's secure and somebody that's taking care of you, somebody that brings you joy, somebody that you can serve. And the Lord is in that. Now, she is confident that that will happen if they leave her. And of course, the Lord is able to make those kind of things happen. If both of those girls had left her at that moment, would it have been possible for the Lord to provide for both of them husbands and a home? And why, yes, of course. We recognize that immediately. But it is clear that the girls are listening to their mother-in-law, and she.
I mean, they packed up.
This is a big step, big step, and it seems like they are on the way. Okay, and there's somewhere where there is this discussion that happens, and it's obviously something in between her final destination, obviously, which is home in Judah. But in between that, she's having this conversation with them. But it does seem that they have given her kind of the "we'll go with you." She even expresses to them that you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. Maybe the implication is by the way that you have continued to think about me or sit with me or be with me or help me or move the stuff or whatever the case is. There's some way in which she is aware that their activities have been beneficial to Naomi. And she's proud of that.
It's interesting that in verse 11, she doesn't call them the word. It's not there, my daughter-in-law. She calls them my daughters.
My daughters.
Which indicates some intimacy with them.
Very intimate.
And they
Very
lived there 10 years.
Very intimate. Yeah. There's a space where she is living there 10 years now. Obviously, the boys get married in between that time. So we don't know exactly how long, but it just says they married women there. And so there's a period of time, and she does feel, I mean, it's clear that she is appreciative, but she also knows that because she doesn't have any more sons. See, when she starts talking to them, and they begin to kind of have this, like, we've met the road that's going to separate us. That seems to be the moment where this conversation is kind of pressed. And so she wants that God be involved in blessing each one of them. Well, Naomi says, then the end of verse 9, they kissed them and they wept aloud. And they said to her, we will go back with you to your people. When it's happened to both of you, I mean, surely they talked about it. They had to have some time where they were thinking about what they were going to say, you know, if it ever came down to that. And so they are hearing Ruth, and they see that she intends to go back, and they are wanting to satisfy her and wanting to be a support to her. And so they're like, hey, you know what? We'll just go back with you. That's a beautiful spirit. And it will be exercised. But verse 11 coincides with what she is saying to them in 8. Naomi continues the conversation. Return home, my daughters. Why would you come after me? Am I going to have more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? Even if that might be possible, okay? You're talking about waiting a span of, 15 or 20 years, whatever the span might be. Would you be willing to wait and give all that up just so that you could marry sons if I had a husband that could produce sons? And I have none of that. But the time frame is her reasoning. It's too much. What does she mean? What is she trying to say?
Need to make a life for themselves.
Ma'am?
Need to make a life for themselves.
You need to make a life for yourself. This plan of you hanging around with me is too long term. It's not sensible. And it's not, it's not that she's trying to say, I don't want you around. That's clearly not the case. But she's just saying, this just doesn't make sense. The facts are not in our favor here.
And they'll be too old.
And they'll be too old by the time those men come along and grew up. You know, that might have been something that could have been or would have been done. But the likelihood of it is just, it's too many things stacked against them.
Was that a custom back in that day?
Okay, so let's just think about that
I think
for
that
just
may
a
be
second. Can we think about an Old Testament example, kind of where that happened? Anybody got one?
That is
Think about
supposed-
Reuben.
Yes. Judah.
Yeah.
Judah has sons, Onan and Perez. Is that right? Ooh, I'm making myself a liar. Onan and somebody. I know Onan is the second one. I don't remember the name of the first one, and both of those boys die. You remember? One of them dies because the Lord finds him wicked, and he puts him to death. And he gives, Judah gives the second son to Tamar, who is the first one's wife. He gives Tamar, because she's the widow now, he gives her to the second brother. Well, that brother is supposed to preserve the family line, and he doesn't. He sleeps with her, but then he spills his seed on the ground. And the Lord puts him to death. Well, Judah has one other son, and he's young. Okay? And he says to Tamar, live at your father's house like a widow until my son, the last one, whichever one his name is, Shalom, I believe, until he grows up. And then whenever he gets old enough, Frank, I'll give him to you as a husband. Well, he told her that, and she was waiting on that. Really, she was. But he was lying about it because he didn't want to give Shalom to her, because in his mind, that woman had already killed two of his kids. So he didn't want to give his last baby boy to that woman. So he just kind of left her. And even though Shalom was old enough and could have been given, she was denied that privilege. Well, that's when he ended up sleeping with her by accident, because he thought she was a prostitute, remember? And then she became pregnant. And then he calls her out, and he's like, shame on you. You were supposed to be living like a widow in your father's house until my precious baby grew up. And she said, I'm pregnant by the man who owns this. You remember? And that's when Judah was like, okay, I should not have been over there. And he doesn't sleep with her again, but he does bear some. So yes, there is example of expectation that they would. I mean, that spirit is very deep in the people.
Didn't they try to trip Jesus up too when in saying that
The example, even from the New Testament, is 7 brothers. I mean, there are 7 different times that this woman is married to another. That's the example we have.
What
It's
was the deal of
pressed
that,
on that.
you know?
It's family preservation. That's all it is. And it is maintaining an heir
Okay.
for the one who died. Because the boy died before an heir was born, that's when that rule was in place. Otherwise, it was not.
When the land was divided up, then they divided parcels to families. And so that parcel that belonged to that family needed an heir.
Needed somebody to be in that spot and
I was
working.
just sitting there thinking about them giving me a 20-year-old man to
Yeah.
live with now.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
an older woman, and I was thinking Reuben. And I don't know if he actually married her, but
Yeah, he went into his father's concubine.
yeah.
He does.
His mother's servant.
His mother's servant.
Nurse or something
Yeah.
like that.
But but she had been taken as a wife by Jacob. Yeah, that's right. And he goes in. So there's quite an age gap, is what Wendell's saying,
Yeah,
between
that's
her
what-
and, yeah.
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 But you kind of think about Naomi going back to Bethlehem. You see, even though it'd been 10 years, there was that parcel of land and probably the house that she could still go right back to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because, but if they didn't have an heir, then that parcel of land was going to be lost. And this is where Ruth gets an heir.
That's what happens
You
right
know,
here.
back then, in several different places, I don't know where there's several of them now, but I've studied where the father and the daughter had a child in order to keep the land,
Right.
keep that land, and the brothers and sisters would marry to keep that land.
There are occasions where that
He
is,
say would keep them.
after the law, that is against the law.
Well, this is what even Lot's daughters was rationalizing.
They weren't. They weren't. Yeah, because they felt like their circumstance was unchangeable. And God certainly could have remedied that easily as he saved them. He could have preserved a line for them. But that was their thinking. It was just like no different than Abraham thinking that he needed to preserve his line through Hagar. I mean, it's about the same spirit and the same sentiment. So there is an expectation that families would act in this way. Well,
They were supposed to move back in with mom and daddy until they found one, but that was a custom in Moab.
see, that is why this account from Judah is because Tamar was living in her father's house as a widow there. And that is maybe the setup that would have been in place.
And probably this tradition of then marrying a brother extended even beyond the law. It was probably also a patriarchal tradition.
So what Wendell is saying
Even
is,
among the Moabites.
yeah,
probably.
is that practice would have been largely appreciated, and everybody would have done that. Everybody would have acted like that because it was necessary in order to preserve the family. And it is, from God's standpoint, it is a way to show respect and honor to a family and make sure that somebody is there who is able to care for it. And you see the way that he provides here, and you can get a really close estimation of how that would look and how it would figure. And because Boaz is going to be that person anyhow.
Yeah, he redeems
Correct.
her. And
Yes,
it's almost like he went to another family member
that's
in
right.
order,
That's right.
because it's that family member's duty to marry her.
That's right.
And
That's right. So there is at least a visible pressure of expectation of this kind of behavior. So, and we'll talk more about that whenever the event happens, but that is exactly what's happening. And Naomi's sort of trying to talk her way through that with these girls. Well, at the end of verse 13, she says, "No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you to think about that kind of setup and that kind of situation, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." Now she wants the Lord to help the girls and show kindness to them and grant them families of their own, etc. But she is tying this to God's hand that has turned somehow against her. That is a really strong statement.
And now the girls are going back home to mom and daddy, and she's going back by herself. She'll be alone.
She will be all by herself. And of course, God is going to provide, and he can, because he's that kind of God. But Yes, she is seeing that the hand of the Lord is upon her. The hand of the Lord is working against her. So there's crying between them. Orpah in verse 14 kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. She accepts what Naomi is saying, and she apparently goes back to her people because she sees that there is some level to which this is unsensible for her to remain in this situation. And maybe she accepts that she believes that God will show kindness and that God will grant that she find and establish her own family. But Ruth clung to her. Now look, Naomi said, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. And your God, my God. Where you die, there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. And when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging him. Okay, so if you're looking for a definition of what determined means, this is a good one. If you are determined in your faith, then it means that spiritually, you would say to the Lord, where you go, I go. Where you stay, I stay. Your people, my people. Got it?
Was these girls from, they serve different
Pagans.
gods, pagans.
Yep. Pagan
So
background.
it's almost like this one accepted the true God
She does.
and follows her mother-in-law.
She does.
And let's go back to the pagan way.
She does. That there is definitely an elevation of her mindset because she is revealing that she is prepared to submit to the God that is the Lord, the God that she knows Elimelech and her husband and Naomi have served. Even though the boys are dead, that spirit of faith obviously is still in Naomi. You hear it out of her mouth there in verse 8. The Lord show you this, the Lord show you that. And then she can't even finish her conversation without saying, well, the Lord's hand is against me. And everything involves out of her mouth the presence of the Lord, the activity of the Lord, and she's got a respect for the Lord. And somehow that communicates to Ruth. Go ahead.
There's a couple of things. One, Orpah's not wrong for going back to their family. At least in our, like in the sense of their family tradition, she's not wrong. There's been this misconception that Orpah like throws up her hands and runs away from them.
Yep.
That's not the case. It was what needed to happen. And Ruth is the anomaly. Ruth is not the norm. She is certainly the outlier because most anybody that was in that circumstance, even today,
Would have done.
would have walked away and said, I love you, but I'm going to go back to the people that I know best, which is my hometown.
Yep.
So Ruth is the outlier. She's not the norm. The second thing is Ruth is an example of 1 Corinthians 7:14. The unbelieving husband is sanctified through his wife. The unbelieving wife is sanctified through her believing husband. There's 10 years of documentation that we don't have, but apparently at some point in that 10 years, Ruth starts to at least have some appreciation for what her husband and her father-in-law and mother-in-law believe. Because when she comes home with Naomi, Naomi's not in a right frame of mind to be a quote evangelist. As a matter of fact, we haven't got to the verse just yet, but verse 20, she tells all the people, just, you know, I'm a bitter old woman, don't talk to me. And that's not exactly the person that's going to be bringing somebody to Christ, if you want to call it that. So at some point in the 10 years, Ruth had to have developed some kind of relationship with God, even though it was a very simple one. It had not developed or grown yet. It's going to. But that's the reason why she goes back with Ruth, is when she goes back with Naomi, she sees the evidence from her husband and her father-in-law and her mother-in-law that this is the lifestyle that I should be pursuing. Now, that's not to knock Orpah's dead husband either. It's just a simple matter of what we see, the evidence we have in front of us. Like I said, we have 10 years of documentation that we don't have, but apparently at some point, a tremendous impact has had on her.
It cannot be, however, understated that the fact of the historical revelation here is the dying of Elimelech and the boys. Those three things, can we say that those three things open the door and give the opportunity for faith to grow? Now, what we would call that is suffering. That's what we would call a husband and two boys being lost. We would call that suffering. But somehow through that, I mean, if they are all lost, like at Job at one time, if they are all looking at this, like if it happens just boom, just where everybody's in there together reasonably, I understand that these pictures can be rough to kind of think about how that happens, or if it all happens within the span of a 3-year period, or however it works out, it happened. And that moment of suffering is where possibly.
Well, when you suffer,
The
C.S.
door
Lewis
is
always
open.
said, C.S. Lewis always said, suffering is God's megaphone to the sleeping world. It's how the attention is got. Like you get,
Yep.
you go back to what you know best when you suffer.
Yep.
And for Orpah, what she knew best was go home to Moab, go back to where I started.
Yep.
For Ruth, something, whatever it is, happens. For her, the break comes, instead of going back to what I've always known, I'm going to stick with what I know now.
Right.
And there's something to that that's pretty remarkable.
And it's a beautiful, I mean, this is a great description. Where you go, I will go. That implies that Naomi would what? She wouldn't be alone. Where you go, I go. I got you back. We're not going to be separated. So that means you, to Mike's point, you're not going to be alone. I'm going to go with you. I'm going to be with you. And when they come back and Naomi is alone, she's not alone because Ruth goes to a field in order to glean for her. Why? Because she is where you go, I go. I got a service that I am going to do for you and with you. So that thing of you being alone is resolved. Your people will be my people. And she treats the people that belong to Naomi's family as if they are like her own family. Where you die, I'm going to be buried there. What does that imply? She's going to bury her. This is a very comforting thing to Jacob. Don't be afraid to go to Egypt. Joseph's own hands will close your eyes.
She's telling her she's gonna take care of her for the rest of her life.
I got you back, and I'm gonna put you in the ground.
And she.
I'm gonna
worked.
stay with you no matter what.
She went to the fields to glean, to get them food.
It's impressive, isn't
Take
it?
care of.
Culturally, it doesn't get much worse than, I mean, in that day and age, it didn't get much worse than being a widow and having no sons.
That's the,
Right, wrong, or
That's the
indifferent, the way
kicker.
that women were treated in that day and age, especially if you had lost your husband and you had 2 boys and they were gone too. That's why she is the way she is and she's going back home. That's why she doesn't want them to go with her. I know what's waiting for me when I get
Yeah.
back. I'm gonna be a pariah in
Yep.
this town.
Yep.
Don't go with me. And Orpah's like, cool, I'm going back.
Yep.
And Ruth says, no, I'll take the place. I'll go and work and I'll go and get food and I'll go and it's remarkable.
and what does she do here at the end? What do we call this when she says, may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely? If even death separates me and you. What is she doing there? What is that called? What's another word for that statement? Oh, it's an oath. It's a vow. You are saying, God can strike me if I get sideways from my commitment to you. Now that puts yourself under God's hand to be disciplined. It shows that you have great faith in God. It shows that you have great faith in God so that your life would be sensitive to that kind of treatment from God. You don't want to be treated like that by God. So you're so respectful of God that you would not allow your behavior to be dislodged from your verbal commitment. That's a vow.
Illustration of our time, Christine.
Hmm.
She lost all her kids, but one, Jerry, which
Yes,
wasn't able to take care of her.
he wasn't.
Floyd Jr., her son-in-law.
Yes.
His wife's gone, but her son-in-law.
Yep.
Stepped in.
Yep.
And he took care of her.
Yep.
Till she left this world.
He put her in the ground.
He put her in the ground, even though he wasn't able himself.
No.
Physically.
Nor was he blood. He
No,
wasn't her blood.
Well, I
But
think
he-
there might have been cousins
Well,
distant down the road, but not.
He was
not-
connected by marriage. is
Yeah.
the point of it. Yeah,
They were some kids and were back.
They was, but that wasn't the point of him taking
that's
care of
right,
her.
yeah.
He was his son-in-law,
that's right.
and he
No,
lived, I mean. we
he really
did.
did. He
We
really
need to
did.
offer up prayers for Junior, because Junior is a faithful, loving.
Yeah.
person.
He took this spirit of Ruth right here and exemplified it
He did.
toward Christine. And all of us would do well to manifest this level of attitude and this disposition in our own life. Now, who are you saying that to? A lot of us could say we are saying that to our spouse. And don't you make that agreement? When you go into a marriage agreement, I mean, one of you is going, and one of you is going to bury the other one. And that's just the agreement that you make when you enter into a relationship and you are saying to God, deal with me, be it ever so severely. I mean, if you got to get my attention, do that, but I'm not going to separate except by death from you. That is a powerful picture. And that is really an expression of love. It is an expression of trust. And Ruth calls it. When Ruth saw her determination, she let it go.
You
Go ahead,
made a
Frank.
statement a minute ago that jumped out at me when at the end of your when at the end of your teaching there, you said that is a vow.
It's a vow.
We don't pay attention to vows like we're supposed to. When you make a vow,
That's it.
that's it.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I don't know how many of you read the obituaries, but last week, I can't remember the name. But the husband died on Friday, and his wife died on Saturday.
How about that? Yeah.
We had there was a couple from Bethlehem, that may be who it is. Just this past week or two, he was 96 and she was 94, I believe.
Yep.
And the daughter said, or the son said, I fully expected one of them to pass away and the other one to pass away soon thereafter, because they had been staying alive for each other.
Yes. Yep.
And that's, so one quick thought is, there's also something to be said for Ruth recognizing, if you want to talk mental health, Naomi's in a really, really bad position mentally. The things she's saying reveal some very dark thoughts about herself. God is dealing bitterly with me. That's her comment when she gets back to Bethlehem. And Ruth's recognition of that doesn't even go unnoticed, because there's something to be said at times. Making a vow is one thing, but living through the dark times of a vow is a completely different thing.
Yeah.
And Ruth makes the vow knowing that we're in the middle of a really, really, really dark time.
Yeah.
And that's when she says, I'm not going anywhere. I'm with you. When I die, I'll die with you. I'll be buried where you. There's something to be said for that, because that's the part Frank's talking about. The recognition of vows, covenant, oath, etc. That's the nature of it. Is the high times are really easy. When everything's great, we're living in a big house and money's rolling in, it's easy. When stuff goes south and you're dealing with depression in your house, or you're dealing with self-loathing, self-hate, and you're the spouse, the easy thing to do, world teaching, is walk out. The hard thing to do is to sit down and go, hey, listen, I know what you're going through. I may not have experienced it, but I'm not going anywhere. That's the hard thing.
That's what Frank's talking about. It's just the vow means that that there isn't an option for you to back out. And that's what she does. And it is a good point that she is doing that in the midst of kind of, and I'm sure that, we can't also miss that Ruth herself is probably grieving, from her own loss, along with dealing with a mother-in-law who is dealing with loss. And her mother-in-law is dealing with twice and three times the loss that Ruth is dealing with. So, I could see.
Given the keys to the city, but she's a foreigner.
Yes.
And she's a foreigner from a place that is our enemy.
That's right.
She's gonna be outside. She's gonna be
you may as well be moving in the tents.
At home, she's gonna have problems.
Yes.
It's gonna be some tough times.
That is a life that she doesn't know at this junction. She doesn't know how the road may play out, Mike. That's exactly right. There may be some dark times. There may be some challenges. There may be some threats. There may be some people that don't like her, that won't treat her the way that God's people are supposed to deal with things.
Well, because of what she did in chapter 3 and verse 11, she is known as a woman of excellence.
That is a great, and that ties us to Proverbs 31, that kind of behavior. It is really, that's a good chapter 3 and verse what?
11.
Yeah, mark that right there. Circle the word determined in 18. Circle the word determined and put 3:11, because there she is called a woman of excellence.
What verse did you say?
It's an internal note, 3:11.
She was determined to do what
She
said
was.
she would do.
She
And
was.
because of that, that's the reputation that she.
And nothing moved her from
And that
that.
is the reason why she's determined to do the right thing, is because that's who she is.
That's right. This is not a put on. It's not for show.
It was rude.
That's right. Transformation has been very good. Yes. Great comments. Thanks, everybody. we'll pick up right there next week.